We're very pleased to have today with us Bill Kohler from the Business School. We're thankful for your time. I'd ask you to take a moment just to shut down any noise-making devices. If your phone's on ring, put it to silent. Any other electronic devices that are going to beep during his presentation. The Integritas Institute augments the formal curriculum with these informal gatherings, usually in the evening in the Business Ethics School over on the west side. We do bioethics lectures. And today we're very glad to have the presentation of Beware of the Law of Unintended Consequences. Beware of the Law of Unintended Consequences. Bill Kohler, you may know, some of you are his students, graduated from North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he has a master's in applied linguistics from the University of Illinois, Chicago. He worked for 24 years as a commercial real estate broker, first in Silicon Valley, California, then in Orlando, Florida, specializing in leasing office space and R&D facilities to electronics corporations. Since 1998, Kohler has lectured in the College of Business at UIC and has taught in Russia, Japan, and China on assignment. He also consults with local Chicago businesses such as the Radisson Hotel, Sara Lee Corporation, Skill Bosch Tool, First Midwest Bank, and Merrill Lynch. He and his wife Sharon reside on campus as part of the Campus Housing Faculty in Residence program. He received UIC's Silver Circle Award for Teaching Excellence in May of 2010, the Faculty and Residence of the Year Award of 2009 and 12, and the Faculty Service Award for Managerial Studies Department in 2012. He's also spoken for Integritas on other occasions in the past and has been very helpful with advice about topics of interest to the students or scheduling with the business school. Friday, November 28th, he will celebrate his 39th wedding anniversary. Congratulations. And he is reputed to make the best chocolate chip cookies on the planet, for those of you who like chocolate chip cookies. Mr. Kohler, thank you.
I have too many electronic devices in front of me. It's always dangerous to agree to speak at an ethics seminar because everyone automatically believes you're ethical. And I don't mean to imply by my attendance here that I'm better than anyone or that I've lived a perfect life. My goal today is to talk to you about some of the trappings of business ethics. And I want to begin by telling you about, telling you about John Baxter. John Baxter was a contractor who was bidding on a multi-million-dollar contract in the suburbs of Chicago. And as he was filling out his bid, and this we're talking about enough income that his company would enjoy 3 years of cash flow if he were to secure this bid. And the bid was to build several hundred residential homes in a Chicago suburb. And as he filled out the bid, he left the bid number blank. He didn't know whether to put in 25 million or 24.5 million or 25.2 million. He was just struggling with what's the number I should put in here. So he thought, why don't I wait and I'll just put it in when I get to the developer's office. He drove to the developer's office, parked his car, came into the lobby, and surprisingly, there was no reception. There was no one there. And so he walked back into where the break room was and the cafeteria was, and there was no one there. It's like a tomb. He thought, this is very strange, no one's here. And he walked into the developer's office, and it was a significant room, maybe 20 by 30, a beautiful hardwood floor, as you can imagine, a very successful looking office. And the developer was not in his office. But John noticed on the developer's desk, there were a stack of bids. And he noticed that on the top of this stack was a bid from his chief competitor, the guy that usually outbid him. And he thought, before I fill in this blank, if I just took a little peek at that guy's bid, maybe that would help me make a decision. And he walked over and just kind of looked at the bid, and he noticed that there was a Coca-Cola can, a soda can, right over the number where the bid was. You could see everything else, but he couldn't see the bid number. And so, gosh darn it, he reached over there and just tipped up the can to look at the bid, and 3,000 metal BBs came rushing out of the bottom of the can and clattered all over the desk and clattered all over the floor, and everybody jumped out of the room next door and went, "Hey, John, we got you. How you doing, buddy?" And John learned the law of unintended consequences. I want to bring to your attention today this thing called ethics. And that ethics, I hope, will become a building foundation for everything you do in business, and I hope in your life. And as you see from the slide behind me, I don't know if you know this, but the United States is the only nation in history that has been founded on an ideal. And if you're familiar with the Declaration of Independence, I've repeated it behind me, I won't read this to you, but I've underlined a few things that I thought was interesting, and that in the Declaration of Independence, they talk about the laws of nature and nature's God and an entitlement there. And they go on to say, and this is the part with which we are all familiar, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by the Creator with a certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think we memorized that when we were in our American history class. So I ask you to think about this idea that there is a law of nature. And I want to introduce you to someone I hold in high regard, a fellow named C.S. Lewis. Does anyone know, or have you heard of C.S. Lewis? If you've read the Narnia tales or the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you're familiar with him. But he brings up an interesting point in a book that he's written, and he asks you to consider what you hear in a conversation when people are quarreling. Have you ever heard people argue? And the quarreling that goes on, he says sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it sounds just merely unpleasant. But however it sounds, we can learn something from listening to the kinds of things people say when they're quarreling. And they say things like this: "How would you like it if somebody did that to you?" Or, "That's my seat, I was here first." Or, "Why should you shove in here first?" Or, leave him alone, he didn't do you any harm." Or, "Come on, you promised." And people say that every day. Educated people as well as uneducated people, adults as well as children. Now, what is interesting about these remarks is that the man who makes them is not merely saying that the other man's behavior doesn't happen to please him. He's appealing to some standard of behavior. And he's appealing to a standard of behavior that the other man knows about. And the other man seldom says, "To heck with your standard." The other man nearly always tries to make out that what he is doing does not really go against the standard, or that if it does, that there's some special excuse. He pretends that there's some special reason in this particular situation why that person who took the seat first should not keep it, or that things were quite different when he was given that bit of orange, so he won't give you his bit of orange, or that something turned up that lets him off the hook. In fact, it looks very much as if both parties have some kind of an idea of a law or a rule of fair play, and that there's some decent behavior or morality, or call it whatever you would like, that they have agreed on. And if they had not, of course, they'd fight like animals. But recognize that quarreling, by its definition, is showing that the other man is in the wrong, and that there would be no sense in trying to do this unless you and he had some kind of an agreement as to what is wrong or right. Just as there would there'd be no sense in saying that a basketball player has committed a foul unless we had rules of basketball as to what was fair and what was foul. Now this law that Lewis is talking about, or this law of nature that people are talking about, the law of nature you saw in the Declaration of Independence, is brought about that everyone knows this by nature, and they don't need to be taught it. Lewis says they do not mean that you might not find an individual here and there who hasn't heard of it, just like you might find someone who's colorblind or has red hair. But for the whole of human race, they have thought that there is this human ideal of decent behavior, and it's obvious to everyone. And I think they're right. I know that some people say that this idea of the law of nature or decent behavior known to all men is unsound because different civilizations and different cultures and different ages have different moralities. But that is not true. They have differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. Lewis goes on to say that if you were to examine the moral teachings of the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Chinese, the Romans, you would be struck by how very alike they are to each other and to our own. And by his own, he means the British civilization, and I would, by association, say the Americans. And here's his point. Think of a country where people are admired for running away in battle. Or think of a country where a man felt proud for double-crossing the people who were kindest to him. Or think of a country where you might as well assume that 2 + 2 = 5. Men have differed as to who they show their unselfishness to. You might be unselfish to just your family, or you might be unselfish to your family and friends, but not strangers, or you might be unselfish to everyone. We might disagree on who we should be unselfish to and who not. But everyone agrees that there is this standard. But what's interesting is they have always agreed that you ought not to put yourself first. Selfishness has never been admired in these cultures. Men have differed as to whether you should have 1 wife or 4, but they have always agreed that you must not simply take any woman you have liked. But the most remarkable thing, Lewis says, is this. Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in a real right or wrong, you will find that man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you break your promise to him, he will say, it's not fair. So it seems that we are forced to believe in a real right and a wrong. People may be sometimes mistaken about them, but as people are sometimes mistaken about arithmetic, this is not a matter of opinion or taste any more than a multiplication table is a matter of opinion or taste. Are you with me? Now let me wrap this little section up for you. He says, these 2 points I want to make. First, that all human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way. And they can't really get rid of it. And secondly, they do not, in fact, behave in that way. Now I want to leave you with a compelling thought. We're not going to wrap this up today, but I want you to think about what I'm about to say, and we can talk about it some other day. They know the law of nature and they break it. These 2 facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in. That's a compelling thought. So let's move on to the points I'd like to make. I want to discuss that idea of ethics with you. I want to provide you with some problems that we face when we try to make ethical decisions, And then I want to provide you with a strategy that will always help you overcome and deal with a dilemma, an ethical dilemma. But what is your basis of authority? Leaning on Lewis again. True or false? Everyone here will live forever. That's either true or it's false. Now what's interesting is what you believe about that determines how you act. If you don't believe everyone here will live forever, that would call for a different kind of action. If you do believe everyone here will live forever, and I'm not talking about our bodies, I think our bodies will, as you can tell, mine is continuing to expire before you. You will, I'm not talking about the physical, we all know that the physical body is going to disappear. The statistics on death are impressive. But if you think there is a spiritual realm here, then you have to look at these three different levels of morality. You have to look at the relationship I have with you, and the relationship I have with myself, or the harmony I have within me. And then I have to deal with my relationship with our Creator. And there are three different levels of relationships here. That's what I want you to think about, versus that last comment I made on critical thinking or clear thinking. Okay? So let's move on to another question. How do you define character? Can you think in your mind right now, what is the definition of character? Well, some people think that character is what you do when no one is looking. As you can see from this slide, this duck has no character. You might call this foul play. But now I've learned where the Aflac duck gets his money. But anyway, the problem with character is, who is looking? And here are the problems with ethics. When you're faced with an ethical situation, it's not always obvious what the right thing to do is. And here I think we've given you a little handout, and if you want to play along with me, we can fill this in. And that is a problem with ethics. A second problem with ethics is when we know what to do, it's sometimes difficult to do it. Have you ever had to go to someone and apologize? Or have you ever had to go to someone and confess? Wow. I've been married 39 years, almost. Been there, done that, have the t-shirt. It's hard to be ethical. And sometimes when we do the right thing, it may produce an unwanted outcome. So let's start looking at this from a business application. There is a true story of Boeing and Lockheed. You may be familiar with them. They've been competitors since the beginning of aeronautics. And they were competing for a government contract, and the head of this particular bid for Boeing realized that if he did not win this contract, that he would have to lay off 1,000 people. And for whatever reason, the day before the contract was due, the day before the bid was due, he received a fax from an anonymous source telling him what Lockheed's bid would be on this $100 billion contract. So, question. I guess I thought I had a little slide here that didn't show up. So, what do? Would you take the facts as, no pun intended, facts, and change your bid to win it? Or would you stay with the bid that you had, knowing if indeed that was Lockheed's bid, you were going to have to lay off 1,000 people the next day? So here's the beef of the hamburger for today's talk. When you are faced with a dilemma, I suggest you ask yourselves these 4 questions. Would I want what I did on the front page of the Chicago Tribune or any newspaper? And I think that would eliminate a lot of choices there, right? Would you want someone else to do this to you? And would your parents want you to do this? I'm the 3rd youngest of 3 sons. I have a younger sister, but I remember my oldest brother, before I went off to college, grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, and the last piece of advice, Bill, if you don't know what to do, just ask yourself, what would Dad do? Well, Dad would never do anything wrong. And then fourth, I think this is great. If you have any doubts, don't do it. If you have any doubts, especially if it's a big decision and you're going to make a big change, don't do it. But these are ethical decisions. These are not, do I take this internship over this internship? But think about what you're about to do. Do you want that on the front page of the paper? Would your parents want you to do it? Would you want this to happen to you? I don't think anyone here would steal $100,000 from their employer. But would you steal 1,000? Would you steal a donut? Yeah, no. What's the answer? Well, here's my question. When does wrong become okay? Does wrong become okay tied to the price tag? Well, what about ethics? If we steal the donut, isn't that stealing? So it's relative? Remember the argument? Well, you wouldn't do that to me if I were you. Well, you gave me a piece of your orange. Isn't there a standard here that we're trying to hold up to? So how do you recognize the right thing? Some people believe an act is okay unless it hurts someone, unless it hurts someone else. I'm encouraging you to think differently. Let me tell you a story about Mary Cantarian. Mary Cantarian sold textbooks here in the Chicago area. And she had a quota of $1 million. And if she reached that quota after 1 year and sold $1 million of books, she would receive a $10,000 bonus. It's great, especially right at the holiday time. And wouldn't you know that on December 15th, she had total sales, this was, I think, 4 years ago, of $999,000. She was $1,000 away from her quota. And if she could sell another $1,000 in the next 2 weeks, she'd hit her million and she'd receive this $10,000 bonus. Now, I spent 25 years in commercial real estate, and I can tell you right now, between December 1st and January 1st, nothing happens in business, especially if you're trying to sell something. Between December 15th and January 1st, you're not going to get anyone in the office, because I always took my vacation during those 2 weeks. Real estate was dead, so why would I try? She came up with this idea. Why don't I give $1,000 to Lincoln High School? They're the poorest high school in my district. And they can take the $1,000 and they can buy books from my publisher. And my publisher will sell $1,000 more books. Lincoln will have $1,000 of books that they can enjoy without any cost. And I will have invested $1,000 to earn $10,000. There's some business analysts in here. What's wrong with that? Right? Sounds like a win-win-win, and no one gets hurt. What would you do? Before we answer that, let me ask you another question. What's your highest aspiration? Is it wealth? Is it fame? Is it knowledge? Here we are at a university. There are PhDs all around us. Is it popularity? Is it integrity? What is your highest aspiration of these five? I talked to an accounting professor at Texas A&M, a fellow named Dr. L. Murphy Smith. And he made the comment that if integrity is second to any one of these, it is subject to sacrifice when a choice must be made. Hard words, but listen to that. It can't be second. Arnold Schwarzenegger said, if you're going into battle, you must have two things, a battle plan and integrity. But if you can only go into battle with one, make sure you have integrity. Because if you have integrity, you'll take care of everybody in that relationship you have. You'll take care of your men, you'll take care of your army, you'll take care of what's right. Do you want your heart surgeon to have cheated on his medical exam? In 1984, I got out of bed one morning and put my left foot on the floor, and I felt 10,000 volts of electricity race down through my spine into my foot, and it was absolutely paralyzing. Worst pain I've ever had in my life. And to make a long story short, I had ruptured a disc in my neck and I needed surgery, which took place 6 weeks later. And I rolled into the surgery room, and they had given me a pill up in my room, and they'd given me a shot up in my room. And I supposedly was going to be feeling some of this, and I came into the surgery room quite alert and feeling everything. which caused me a little bit of concern. And then the nurse said, "Now, Mr. Kohler, where is the pain? Is it down your left leg or is it down your right leg?" And those of you who know me by now know that I was not going to say left or right. I was going to ask her a question. And I said, "Isn't it a little bit late to be querying a guy who's been drugged 3 times which leg is causing him pain? How do you know you're going to get an accurate answer?" And she said, "Well, that's probably the side that the disc is ruptured to. We need to stand on that side of you, so when we cut you open and take the disc out, it'll be easier." I said, "It's my left leg, that's what's causing the problem." And then the doctor said, "Are you ready?" And of course I can't say yes or no. I started with one of my long answers, and then boom, I went out like a light. Woke up what seemed like just 5 minutes later, pain was gone, I could walk. Unbelievable. But I did not want my surgeon to have cheated on his laminectomy exam. Think about that. And thinking of thinking, what do you think about? Where do you put your mind? Your mind is a powerful weapon. Your mind is a powerful tool. One of the problems with pornography is that your mind will capture it and retain it, and you can refer to it all the time for the rest of your life, and it contaminates your thinking. There's a little poem I remember that it says, if you think something, you then sow a thought, reap an action. If you sow an action, like a farmer sows, S-O-W, you will reap a habit. If you sow a habit, you will reap a character. If you sow a character, you will reap a destiny. Everybody you read about in business who has been arrested and put in jail for fraud or for whatever, embezzling, they did not come to work that day. Bernie Madoff did not come to work one day and say, "I'm going to embezzle several $billion from all of my clients." He got into trouble on a little bitty scale, and it continued to snowball. You will not come to work one day and say, "I'm going to do something bad." You're going to come to work one day and you're going to be tempted. And you're going to be faced with that ethical dilemma. Do I go to the right or do I go to the left? It's insidious. If you don't know the word insidious, it means it's sneaky and it comes in and you don't even see it and you don't even feel it. So what do you think about? That is what is going to drive you. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. You've probably heard that. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So think about the good things. Think about how you can improve. Think about what is pure and righteous and good, and dwell on these things. And those decisions are a lot easier to make when you're faced with them. Every thought has its consequences someday. Now this is mine. If you want to steal it, steal it. But I was thinking about you guys today and I thought, what can we do with this thing called ethics? Every thought has its consequences someday. Watch this. Every thought has its consequences someday. You like that? Your ethics are driven by the way you think. And every thought will drive that. So, quick review, we'll wrap this up. What are the 4 questions you ask when you're faced with an ethical dilemma? The first one is, do you want what you did on the front page of the Chicago Tribune? Now, Bill, this is when I wish you'd had a donut over there. I was going to go over there and grab a donut. Do you want someone else to do this to you? Does anybody have Michael Miller? Nobody's taken his class yet? He and I are down the hall from each other, so it's a fellow professor of mine. Would you want your parents, would your parents want you to do this? And lastly, do you have any doubts? If you have doubts, don't do it. Don't do donuts. You like alliterations? There's no alliteration. Okay, let's go back to Boeing. What did they do? They did not change their contract. They lost, they did not change their bid. They lost the contract. They laid off 1,500 employees. Happy ending? No. But I thought this is interesting. Today, Boeing is a sole entity. Lockheed had to merge with Martin Marietta to survive. Funny how ethics work. What about Mary? She did not donate the $1,000 to Lincoln. She did not reach her $1 million quota. She did not earn her $10,000 bonus. But 2 years later, she was promoted to national sales manager. Don't you think her boss knew she could have manipulated the system to earn that bonus? Oh yeah. But she thought there's something wrong with this idea. I don't think I want to do that. Mary Cantarian is not for sale, and she was promoted to national sales manager because everybody in the system knew she could have worked the system to her good. But she thought that was unethical. So where do you draw the line when you make your choices? I'm hoping I've planted some seeds here that will grow and you can think about the choices that are ahead of you. So, avoid the law of unintended consequences by thinking before you act. Here's a fine fellow that missed the no photo sign in the museum. What's my point? A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. And you can take that to the bank. Are there any questions you would like to ask me? I think, Bill, I've put such a pall on this group, they've lost their sense of humor. But I hope that you've taken what I've had to say with the spirit in which it's given. As I said, I wish someone had told me this when I was a senior in college, a junior in college, whatever. But companies today are looking for ethical people. AT&T, when they hire you, I was a senior manager friend at AT&T. When they hire you, they go through your entire resume after you're hired. Of course, they scrutinize you before you're hired. But if you put on there that you went to a Dale Carnegie sales course for 2 days and you didn't, they come back and they fire you. Ethics is rampant throughout corporate America today because there's so many people who have caused so many problems that now they've got ethical training, ethical seminars. So just build this into your psyche. You will have much greater peace of mind when you do. And again, I've got my name and email address and phone number. That's my cell phone. If you want to talk about any of these items, I'll be happy to address them. I thank you for coming out in this cold weather, and thank you for your attention, and look forward to seeing you again soon.